1. Where can I start? So my grandparents have a big house in England due to my granddad having a lot of sad money. By sad money I mean he got it from inheritance because most of his family died off when he was young, leaving him to retire early. Anyway, before I was born it was where the majority of my family stayed: my granddad, step-grandma, 4 uncles, black Labrador, and my mum. So a very busy house. This house wasn't too old when my granddad bought it, maybe 20 years old, and it didn't look freaky. In fact, it looks quite modern for an English house. For quite a while everything was alright until the first incident happened. The first incident wasn't scary, frankly, could have been a prank done by any of the family. It started off in the smallest room, known as the kids' room. There was a lock on the outside of the door to prevent the dog getting in, as this door would be easier for him to push open. Every time a family member, no matter who, would be locked in after they enter. This meant they would not be able to unlock the door as they were on the inside. Most times they would call out and bang on the door until someone came, but sometimes there would be no one home, and the person on the inside would have to use their landline to call a nearby family to come and let them out. My family isn't very superstitious, especially my granddad, who has zero tolerance for anything. I like to call him a boomer. So everyone used to blame my mum. I know it's just her word, but she promised the family even years later. Still promises me it's not her. My mum wasn't very suspicious until she had to spend a night in the small room when she went traveling. One of her brothers took over her room. The second incident occurred over the 2 nights she slept in that room. She claimed one night she woke up around 1 or 2 a.m. and saw a very tall figure next to the door go out of the room. She thought it might have been her eyes not properly adjusting after just waking up, so she laid back and turned her face to the wall. She then turned around again about 10 minutes later, seeing the room much clearer in the dark, and the figure was still there. She thought this time it was one of her brothers, so she called out to them. There was no response, and she started to get angry and turned on her lamp. Nothing appeared next to the door, so she slowly turned off her lamp, a bit shaken up, and went back to sleep. The next night, the same thing happened, but that night she was less anxious and brushed it off, never really talking about it. But on the 3rd night, waking up again, there was nothing, no figure at the door. She thought it was weird, but still didn't really ever mention it, until after I was born and came here to stay over one Christmas holiday. This was the 3rd incident. As I was the youngest of around 6, I had to stay in the kids' room. Christmas Eve came and I woke up around 12 to 12:30. I turned around in bed and noticed a figure at the side of the door that scared me. I covered my face with a duvet and stayed like that for 5 minutes. As a child, I was very superstitious, listening to all the rumors of ghosts, so I was too scared to get out of bed and go past it to get out of the door. After those 5 minutes, I decided to face my fears and go to my mum. But when I took my head out of the covers, there was nothing by the door anymore. I came to realize it might be my granddad, so I brushed it away. This happened until Boxing Day, with an occurrence from 12 to 4 in the morning. It became a routine for me and never brought it up to my mum until this year. It was the summer holidays, and I was spending the holidays at home, which is only 10 minutes away from my granddad's, as I moved out about 4 years ago. I decided to go visit my cousins who were staying at my granddad's, and when I got there, my youngest cousin, age 6, came running up to me and said, "Why is there a man always standing by the door at night?" This ran chills down my spine. And then I began to talk to my mom about it, who then talked to my family. We all ended up having weird experiences in this small room, and ever since I've all called it the naughty kids' room, to scare the boys, saying if they're bad, they'll have to go in that room at night, and we'll make the strange man come out. Let's just say my cousins are well behaved now. So what's the one conclusion I can bring this to? I think it'll be the kids' room is haunted. 2. I've always been interested in urban legend stuff, creepy stories, monsters, and cryptids, whatever. I was born in Minnesota, but I've lived in Montana for pretty much all of my life. Think Yellowstone country to the southwestern area. My family is super into the outdoors, camping, hiking, backpacking, hunting, fishing, etc. We are basically the poster child family for that sort of thing. We are regulars in Yellowstone and Glacier, the whole Rocky Mountain area. We frequently travel for our camping trips. If we go out of state, it's usually not very far, like Idaho, Wyoming, or Colorado. Recently, we've been pretty fond of the Island Park area in Idaho. I couldn't tell you why, probably for the fishing, camping, and ATV access. But we are fairly new regarding that area, and we've only really been spending time down there for about 2 years now. So far, I have a lot of stories from Island Park that I can share later. There's some weird stuff down there. I don't really know if anything has ever happened there or a lot about history, so if anyone knows, please share. For those of you that have never heard of Island Park or have never been there, here's a brief explanation. In my opinion, it's one of the strangest places in the Northwest. So weird because it's home to a lot of landmarks and sites. It's called a city, but it's essentially just a long road, think of the main street in a major town, that runs through Targhee National Forest, and off this main road are several trails, roads, and accesses, where you can find campgrounds and other things. There are a few fairly large neighborhoods where you can rent out cabins and such, but I don't know many people that live there full time. The ATV trails run everywhere, there's really no town area. Everything that's civilized is found off of the main road, including a very good Mexican restaurant, check it out. So you'll be on one of the side roads for days at a time and not see another person or another gas station for miles. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful area, with good fishing, and it's nice if you want to get away from everyone, but it's a sketchy area. There's nothing wrong with it, and I would recommend visiting it. The people there are friendly, and it's a good atmosphere. I just get an unsettling feeling there at times. For example, there are parts in the forest where every tree looks the same and it's dead quiet. Makes me shiver. It reminds me of that story or a joke a while back that Idaho isn't real and the government made it up. Makes me laugh every time because Island Park definitely gives off that vibe. Okay, I'm getting carried away. As I said, I have tons of stories from this place. So my family and I were camping at Upper Coffee Pot, a campground pretty far back in the forest, right on Henry's Fork, beautiful spot. We were at the head of the campground, so right next to our spot is a trailhead, and another spot adjacent to us. All the other camping spots are down the road the opposite direction. The trail is very long. Okay, like it follows the riverbank the entire time, but it goes all the way to Trout Hunters, local spot for guys up the road, 11 miles from the campground. And this trail connects to everything. Again, I need to remind myself to focus on one story at a time. On this particular day, we were hanging around camp, just fishing and being lazy. And around 3 o'clock, my dad, my sister, and I decided to go for a hike up the trail just for fun. We get all geared up and throw on our jackets and shoes. The trail is pretty well carved out. You could do it in flip-flops. We didn't grab bear spray, but my dad grabbed a headlamp, because like I said, it's a heavy used area, and we didn't plan on being out that long. We headed out and were chatting and laughing. I have no idea how far we made it. According to my dad, we were close to Trout Hunters. Looking back on it, now that I've hung around that area more, that wasn't true. Eventually, it starts to get dark and we turn around. Nothing out of the usual had happened, but still, anyone knows you don't want to be out miles from signs of people with no bear spray and one light. It gets dark quick and there's no moon that night. We are trying to save the headlamp battery in case we really need it. So we are going along the dark, watching the river and warning each other. Hey, there's a stump right. And watch out for that dip. All of you who are avid hikers or have been outside at night know that time feels very different once it's dark. Now, I'm not a wuss, I'm a tough chick. Growing up as the oldest out of 3 girls in my family with my parents, that raised us to be badass, educated, and outdoors enthusiasts. But I have my limits, and I'm unfortunately the first one to get uneasy or worried about something. But on the opposing end of that, my feelings are usually right. So my family knows to listen to me when I say shit's about to go down. So naturally, I start to get antsy, and I start questioning my dad, asking how much further, did you bring matches, blah blah blah. We have no idea what time it is or how long we've been out. None of us had our watches on from fishing earlier, and like I said, time is cruel in the dark. I try to distract myself from every noise I hear by talking and focusing on the path I can barely see in front of me. I'm getting nervous because to my brain and internal clock there's no way we should still be hiking. We should be back by now. My mind is running rampant about who knows what, and the more realistic dangers. Bears and angry bull moose. My dad is getting anxious too and decides to turn the headlamp on to offer some security. We all know there's only one way we're gonna get back, and that's walking. But none of us were particularly happy about the current situation, which involved no protection. Which was our mistake, of course, for being lazy about our gear and undermining the time of day. Soon we can see lights from the campfires in the distance, but they are faint, small specks of light. And we guess we have about 3 more bends to go before we actually enter the vicinity of the camp. That's about when I got the feeling. I get goosebumps and shiver for a second. Then from behind us comes this scream. It's very distant, but trust me, anyone can recognize a scream. I've heard a lot of animal sounds in my life, and a lot of them are pretty whack, but this sounded like a rabbit scream. I don't know if you've ever heard a rabbit scream, but it's terrifying. That sound should not come from a small animal. We all stop in our tracks and are silent for a minute. Soon my dad turns to us and says a coyote or something probably spooked the rabbit. I nod and shiver again, and we continue, all a little on edge. About 30 paces ahead, I stop, and I get this feeling of dread mixed with terror that shoots down my body. I'm thinking, no, 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 no. I don't know why, but I can't move, and it was probably because of what happens next. About maybe 20 yards back, I hear this strange cry. I can't describe it very well. I've never heard anything like it. It was a low whisper like a screech followed by a rustle and a faint laugh. And I know that sounds silly, but when I say laugh, I don't mean like a chuckle or the Joker's laugh. I mean more like a chant. Like 2 of the same words repeated in a rhythmic fashion. Note that the sound is very faint and low, but I can still hear how close it is. At this point, I'm running to catch up with my sister and my dad, nearly pissing my pants. Nope, nobody noping out of there. Who knows what else is out there, and I'm pretty much scaring myself at this point, instead of being rational. I catch up to them, and my sister is pale. I ask her if she heard the sound, and she goes, "You mean the rustle followed by the growl?" "Yeah." My dad looks at me and motions for us to keep going. I ask him if he's ever heard anything like that before, and he says it was probably the same thing we heard before. I kind of got the sense he was lying, but I didn't say anything because if he was acting calm, it calmed me down. We continued around the next bend for a while, and suddenly we all freeze, because there's this rustle a couple of feet in front of us. My dad turns the lamp off, and we all stand still, holding our breath. If it's a bull moose, you don't want to catch him by surprise, so we are all waiting it out. After a minute and no other sound, we continue on. My dad is shining the headlamp on the ground, and he comes to a sudden halt. My sister and I want to know what's going on, so we go take a look. On the ground were footprints. My dad gave a motion for us to be quiet, and we slowly followed them. They started out as sort of spread out, long, almost human-shaped. Or maybe a small bear or the big back foot of a rabbit. Now, not one of us was paying attention to where we were anymore. We were looking at the footprints. But my dad looks up, and we are 10 feet from the opening of the trailhead, about 20 feet from our campsite. We can see my mother and other sisters sitting by the fire. We are all relieved to be almost back, so we are joking around and continue to look at the footprints. Obviously, we don't want some hobo following us to camp, or wherever they belong to. The prints got smaller and more closely spaced. My dad said that was strange. This is where the story starts to get whack. The prints started to resemble that of a deer or small elk, and we were all confused. My dad suggested maybe the deer or elk came from the water, which caused the marks to look bigger and longer earlier on the trail. How could they start by looking human or bear-like and turn into deer hooves? But that's not even the strangest part. The longer we stood there, the more the information flooded in. The prints were one set of deer hooves, so unless we missed something, deer have always had 4 legs. Soon the prints stopped, just stopped, about 5 feet from the trailhead, just vanished. My dad scanned the area. The footprints didn't go off into the trees anywhere. They didn't turn around. It was like whatever made them just disappeared at that point. My sister laughed and shrugged it off, saying maybe the 2-legged deer could fly. I started to feel sick to my stomach. I think the mix of the dark, the weird sounds, the impossible footprints got to me. I ran back to camp and promptly puked into some shrubs. I got to bed that night just fine, but I definitely was not okay with what we found earlier that night. I knew I was safe, but part of me knew something was not right about those tracks and those noises. My dad woke me up the next morning and told me our deer friend visited last night. I jumped out of bed and went to have a look. Sure enough, there were a couple of deer tracks around the trailer. For the rest of the time we were there, we didn't see any more two-legged deer prints or human prints, and heard no more noises, thank God. I still think about those tracks disappearing and somehow changing into another, and that god-awful sound. I tell myself that it was just wet deer tracks, but I can't fully convince myself. If anyone has any questions, please ask. If anyone knows what could have happened that night, or has an explanation about what followed us that night, please let me know. I'm very curious. 3. I was 12 and was staying at home babysitting my younger brother, 7. I say babysitting. It was more I had an excuse to sit downstairs and play my GameCube, uninterrupted on the family TV, while I let my brother stay up late playing a DS in his bedroom. Both my parents were working, and my dad away for most of the week in Finland, and my mother was working in town on a few social inclusion and youth work projects. Now I'm happily downstairs playing away Metroid Prime 2. I was completely addicted to the Metroid games back then. When I hear a laugh, it wasn't like some sinister villainous laugh or some kid giggling. It literally sounded like a man who had just met his boss after a meeting, giving kind of a forced, trying to be nice but I don't think you're funny laugh. This sounded like it came initially from the corridor just adjacent to the lounge. Initially I heard it, then just sort of shrugged it off and continued playing the game. My brother Elliot then wanders down the stairs. Being the older brother and clearly mad with power, I pause the game, turn around and tell him that he's supposed to be staying silent in his bedroom and playing his DS, so that way if our mum comes home she won't know he's up. I won't get chewed out for letting him stay up past his bedtime. Elliot is confused and says that he's had headphones in and came down to ask if the laugh had come from the TV, as it was clearly loud enough to make him stop what he was doing. At that point, we hear the exact same laugh again, pretty much identical to the first. So there we are, not knowing what to do. Weirded out, but at this stage not terrified per se. Being the older brother and realizing Elliot was beginning to freak out a bit, I figured now was the time to start establishing what the hell is going on. Because at this point, I can't fully discern where this noise is coming from, as it seems to be all around us. But surely it's just coming from a household electronic. First thing I do is turn off the TV volume. We hear the laugh again. There's a cabinet in the house's dining room that has some cheap dumb pound store, I guess dollar store for Americans, Halloween crap in it. Like these plushy heads that when you hit them have pre-recorded sounds in them. One is a vampire, which I know for a fact has a cheesy laugh. We find it, try it, completely different noise, which is distorted and crackly, and of course, we then hear the laugh again. At this point, Elliot is not only panicking, but so am I. My dad had an office with the family PC, so next I go there to see if it's a computer. The computer is on, but the only set of speakers in the room are off. There's no radio downstairs, no other television sets. Elliot's DS has been switched off, and we still hear the exact same laugh, seemingly around us again and again and again, at random intervals. Elliot's crying, I'm shaking. Neither of us know what the hell is happening. At this point, the practical part of my brain that said it has to be a speaker has accepted some weird shit is going on. I rack my brain for anything that would make sense in this scenario, then it hits me. Our grandfather has died about 6 months prior to this night. My dad, while not religious, had been brought up in an extremely religious Irish Catholic family, so he kept little laminated cards from funerals on the same cabinet in the dining room. I don't know if that's weird or not, but hey-ho. Anyway, he had almost like a little shrine, one of his mother, one of his best friend, and in more recent times his father, our grandfather. So there I am, taking this piece of laminated card asking Granddad, are you there? Can you give us a sign? That kind of crap. There was no immediate response, but still the same laugh maybe a minute later. By this point we're completely freaked, so we go to the kitchen and I get a knife. In hindsight, no, I have no idea what good a knife would be against a seemingly incorporeal laugh, but I mean, what the hell else am I meant to do? My brother's bawling his eyes out and I'm way out of my depth. At this point, we go up the stairs and start to move up them, trying desperately to figure out if someone was in the house, or if the sound is coming from a room, anything really. Still the same laugh, not coming from anywhere in particular, just all around. By this point, we're out on the front porch, in the middle of November, freaked out of our minds with a kitchen knife. Our house was at the end of the street, so no, nobody approached us before you ask. We were out there for a bit to calm down, but obviously freezing, so went back inside. The moment we did, right on cue, we get the laugh. At this point, we're just done. There's tears, there's panicking. We're both done. Then Mum gets home. She walks through the door to see the scene of her two sons shaking and crying, and desperately trying to explain to her what's happened. And to our credit, we did try. But the moment we did, she pretty quickly dismissed the entire thing. There was no more laugh, no more feeling of being watched or like there was a presence. It was just over and done with, and it hasn't happened since. Now, a lot of years have passed. This would have been back in 2004 or 2005. I'm now 28, and Elliot is 23, to give you an idea. About a year ago, I came down from where I'm currently living with my fiancé to give a careers talk at a local college I did some work at. My mother and stepfather were out of town, and it was just me and Elliot. My father has since sadly passed away. I gave the talk, met my best friend's son for the first time, and asked if he'd be my best man, then met with my brother back at the same home we'd grown up in, where he was house-sitting. We were chilling and making dinner and possibly abusing the liquor cabinet. We get talking and the subject of that night comes up. I needed Elliot to relay it to me, and sure enough he gives me the same story after not talking about it for well over a decade, beat for beat. I asked if since then he'd ever heard that laugh again, to which he said no. But on nights where he and his friends had slept over and camped out downstairs, they had had the exact same feeling of someone being there on multiple occasions, seen black shapes right outside the glass adjacent to the front door. I can't attest to this myself, but I did share the original experience with my brother, so I see no reason to doubt him. This wasn't an old house. It was newly built along with the rest of the street in 1990. To the best of my knowledge, it wasn't built on some ancient battleground, or the hallowed grave of someone's ancestors. No mishaps during the construction of the place or anything like that. Nothing happened before. Nothing strictly happened here other than what my brother told me in years to come. So I don't have an explanation for this other than what happened. 4. November 1988. I was 17 and in foster care because of a lot of problems with my mother. My grandmother was nearing the end of her life and a battle with breast cancer. Her oldest daughter, my aunt, flew out to California to be with and care for her. 5 days before her death, she woke to an overwhelming urge to talk to me. My aunt called my foster parents, 3-hour time difference, and we were able to talk before I left for school. 2 days before her death, she wanted to talk to me again. The beginning of the call was in English, but by the end she was switching between Japanese and Hawaiian, and calling me by my mother's name. Auntie took the phone, reassured me all was normal, and ended the call. November 30th was a normal day. Schoolwork, homework, dinner, chores, and bed. I went to bed earlier than normal. Soft music, favorite pillow, sweet bliss of slumber. About 2 hours later, I awoke to someone sitting on the edge of my bed and tickling my foot. Just like my grandmother used to do when I lived with her when I was little. I looked up. There she was. A soothing white light radiated all around her. She had hair, she had weight. She wasn't the thin, bald, sick woman my aunt had described to me. Jima? Aloha, my love. She was back to speaking in Hawaiian. Her whole conversation was in Hawaiian. Are you gone? She stood up, opened her robe, showed me 2 perfect breasts with no horrible surgery scars. I am whole. I have no more pain. I wanted to tell you that I love you one more time. I'm so proud of you and of the woman you're becoming. You have loved me well. Be safe in this knowledge. Now sleep, my love. Your aunt will be calling soon." I snuggled back down and she stroked my forehead, singing a lullaby. I was fast asleep when my foster mother opened my door, telling me that my aunt was on the phone. Skip ahead 4 years, I am married and pregnant with our first son. We lived in a small 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. I was having a horrible pregnancy and was placed on bed rest at 4 months. My husband got up one night, travelled down the short hallway to the bathroom. Whoosh! The whole bedroom was filled with a white light. I was standing in the corner, looking at my body laying in bed. My grandmother walked in and scooped my baby son right out of my stomach. She was holding my son and talking to him, and he was talking to her. She stroked his hair, turning it blonde. Stroked each eyebrow, turning his eyes blue. I have brown hair, brown eyes. My husband was a blonde as a child, but turned brown as he got older. He also has green eyes, as did his father. She talked to him for a few more moments, kissed each cheek, and placed him back into my stomach. Whoosh. My husband turned off the bathroom light and came back into our bedroom. I sat straight up, blinked, touched my stomach, felt my baby move. "Honey, are you all right?" I told my husband what just occurred. He patted my tummy, said goodnight, and went back to bed. September welcomed our blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby boy. He just turned 27, still blonde and blue-eyed. 5. Before I start my story, I want to let it be known that I do not have any mental issues and I've never had a sleeping problem. This took place 18 years ago. I was 12 at the time. Me, my mother, father, and the rest of the family just moved into the 5th floor of an apartment building in a neighborhood near downtown. I instantly had a negative feeling about this place and to this day regret moving there due to this experience. Within the first week, everything was okay, but then the nightmares started. In the dreams, I didn't feel like myself. I felt as if there was a force controlling me. It would start by getting me off the bed, opening my bedroom window, and throwing myself from 5 stories to my death. Once I hit the ground, I would wake up. I had the same nightmare every single night. I was worried if one night I would actually act out the dream by sleepwalking. Adding on to this, most nights before falling asleep, I would see shadowy figures as well as hear voices and faint whispers. Most of the time I couldn't understand the language that was spoken, but other times I would hear English, and what was said was some of the most evil I've ever heard. I'd rather not repeat what was said, but these voices definitely tried putting messed up things in my head. I did my best to ignore it, but this went on for hours at a time every night. On one particular night, I woke up from hearing the voices and whispers louder than ever. I opened my eyes as I also heard heavy breathing right near me. I saw nothing, but I had that feeling when you know something is there. I turn my head towards my bedroom door and I see this transparent whitish figure floating right through my door and across the ceiling towards my bed. It stopped right above me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was really hoping it was another dream, but it wasn't. What happens next is one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. This entity came down on me with such force it started choking me. I really felt like it was the end for me. Close to a minute passes by while I fight, gasping for oxygen. I'm almost to the point of suffocation. Lungs are about to give out. When this demon lets me go from the chokehold as I'm coughing, staring at it in shock. I sit up in bed while I see the figure floating out of my room through the door. The next day after this happened, I asked my mother if I could have another room in the house instead, telling her I disliked that room. She agreed, and when I made the switch, I didn't have any more nightmares, and I never saw or heard anything else again. I will never forget this paranormal near-death experience. It will stick with me for the rest of my life. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 167. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Kind of an odd week for paranormal. It was quite hard to pull this one together. As such, although I was up in plenty of time and had the first video recorded, I'm getting done about 5 hours later than I wanted to. Just the way it is sometimes. Today, getting me through the waiting period and editing and such, I've been watching clips of James Acaster. If you haven't heard of him, you're welcome, you now have. He's a British comedian. Was actually surprised to learn he's in his mid-30s because he seems younger. But he's very eccentric, always getting into all sorts of hijinks, and the most wonderful way of telling stories. Thoroughly recommend. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.